Well, a chilly afternoon. Thanks for joining me with this video here about propaganda. I'm not going to say the video itself is propaganda, but I'm definitely trying to tackle the subject a little bit, and I'm going to make it a little playful, and I definitely am not trying to, well, first I'm not trying to poke or prod at anyone in particular, and second of all, I'm not trying to present any particular solutions or, well, except for one, which is just educating ourselves against the truth, or against what's proposed as the truth, rather, what we're told the truth is. And I watched several videos of older propaganda, old films from the 50s, 40s, 60s, whatever. Going back to even World War II, when they would try to put up very racist propaganda against not just the Nazis, but the Jews, not just the Jews, but the Mexicans, not just the Mexicans, but the blacks, the reefer madness that black men would smoke cannabis and rape women, and all this nonsense. But the Japanese were a perfect example. I watched a film where they had an American, obviously white guy, who was dressed up to look like an Asian, and basically a very, very racist propaganda film about buying U.S. war bonds. And it was a way of him saying, "Oh, you'll think you know Japan, but we laugh at you Americans." And the whole idea was to get people to think that the Japanese were supporting their military through buying war bonds, and therefore buy war bonds here. Now, let's step back for a minute and really look at this. Who was profiting from this? Of course, the banks are always profiting. Most of the propaganda out there is to get people to support either a cause or a company or an idea by promoting it in many different ways. They have to be average Joe propaganda, which they have used in every election. Well, this farmer over here or this coal worker over here supports this president or this official, and people just buy into it. And then there's also the bandwagon, jumping on the bandwagon, which is a term that goes way back, and it's really one that a lot of people do. You know, if you're a Republican, you're going to jump on the bandwagon for whichever Republican has the nomination, and same with a lot of Democrats. If you are a Christian, you're going to jump on the bandwagon with what your church is saying about the Bible rather than often what you may think. Now, this is just generalizing. I'm not saying everybody's like this, of course. There are a lot of people who see through the propaganda in religion and politics. Where I'm going with this is to say that if you look back at all the propaganda that was promoted up to, say, the sixth, from the beginning of history up until the time of television, you see how television changed the whole paradigm. It allowed the news companies to get involved. It allowed people to dominate the market, and allowed folks to convince others to vote with their hearts and not their minds. And that's one of the most foolish things a person can do. Although we want to follow our hearts, voting for ideas and for people, we have to use our minds to say, where is this really going to go? Not just where do we hope it's going to go. And there was a lot of nonsense promoted that people believed, but one point I'd really like to make here is, please don't think that we don't have a chance, that everything's propaganda, that everything you see on television or everything you hear on the radio is a lie. It's just as foolish as thinking that your vote doesn't count. In some cases, maybe it doesn't, and in some cases, maybe the propaganda all is total nonsense, but you have to be able to sift through it and see the truth, the gems, and there's a diamond in every lump of bullshit coal, and you can find that diamond and use it. The reason I'm saying this now is because people stop trusting not just the government. The government has become they, the entirety of the government. Now, I have friends that work for the state. They're considered part of the government. The governing body is not a ruling class. The governing body are the servants for us. Although a 0.1% of those people are domineering, sociopathic, and want to basically conquer and take over everything for themselves. A vast majority of people just want to live in peace and support their groups. And their support of their groups is based on their education about what's right and what's true. The more worldly a person becomes, the more they become acceptant of not just your borders in your home, but your borders in your town, opening up to the borders in your state, country, world, that we're all a functioning unit as a whole in this world, and that unless, put it this way, not everyone will always be happy. You'll never be able to make everyone happy, and that's just the world we live in. So you have to protect your assets, you have to protect your interest as a country, and that's what we do. So we turn that into nationalism, to think we are superior to all the other countries, and that's not how it works. And that propaganda has gone out the window. I mean, if you look back at the 1970s and the 80s, there were a lot of CBS and NBC, it was just mostly CBS and ABC, news reports about horrible things our government had done. You can look up an old CBS broadcast, I think from the 80s, about the CIA and mind control, and it was an hour-long special where they, questioned and poked and prodded at generals and at people who were involved in these things. And, at this time, media was not controlled by anyone. These were people really, this is when journalists still existed. I think what's happened is we fear that everything is a lie now. Everything's propaganda. I hear people who say that scientists are all lying, that they're all in cahoots and everybody's just trying to pull the wool over our eyes, that the world's really flat, or that there's no moon, or that the Illuminati are pulling the strings through mind control and spraying chemtrails which get into our body, and then the barium allows them to control our minds through frequencies, energies. This is just the tip of the iceberg of all the kind of stuff that I've heard, and these are all lumps of coal, but inside of these lumps is a little grain of truth. Like with the chemtrails, no, not every persistent contrail is chemical in nature or trying to pollute the atmosphere, but at the same time, there's a little bit of truth to that, because the military is spraying chaff, which is aluminum or barium. It's used for communication. So basically they can bounce radio signals off the ionosphere and back down to military areas. They also use it for cloud seeding. They've also used it for climate control or to try to dim the sun, all these different things. The point being that there's a little bit of truth within that, but it's a very small bit of truth within the whole of the millions of airplanes flying around every year. But people become afraid, and the propaganda goes both ways. People stopped trusting one another. Why did this happen? Has it always been that way? I think what's happened is that people can no longer just hide in their little groups in their small towns and ignore the rest of the world, because the internet brought this communication where if you want to tell your kid that, hey, this is what God is and this is what life's about, and then they want to go on the internet and look for themselves, they can really quickly dispute anything you say, depending on how they want to see it. And teaching your children values and morals and to be afraid of God and to trust their government and all these things, it doesn't work anymore. That we're all opened up, but we feel like we've been lied to so much that we can't trust each other anymore. We can't trust one another. I mean, people don't even trust their friends and their neighbors. I've been on YouTube making videos talking about these things for 3 or 4 years now, and I still get people who call me a shill or think I'm an agent or, a reptile or whatever it may be because I disagree with them. Every single time I've had somebody accuse me of being something, it's because I disagreed with them on one point, because people are so wrapped up in what they believe that if you question a person's beliefs, they're so touchy about it that they take the ad hominem approach and find fault in you directly rather than looking at the subject. And I'd like to say that people are waking up, and I see that people seem to be waking up to the nonsense. Not just the propaganda that we've been lied to throughout our history, but that we're lying to each other and ourselves now, and that there are people in power who would like us to think that we are lying to each other, who would like us to think that we're all fools. They've always tried to make the prophets look like fools. They've always tried to make any group who gets too large to look like a threat or a terrorist organization, internal terrorism, if somebody wants to overthrow their own government or to try to step up and say these things are wrong, the government can use that and throw it at the right-wingers and say, look, they're trying to take your guns. And that's the kind of shit people believe. It really is. People are voting with their hearts still. And it's always been that way, and it'll probably always be that way because we're human. But I think this election here in the U.S. is really showing me how divided it can be. You know, every discussion, I wouldn't say I've had a single discussion with a Trump supporter. Every one of them just says, you're an idiot, you're an asshole, you're a dumb shit, you're a fucking retard, or you know, liberal libtards, all these different things. And when you open it up to a discussion, you realize these people are just angry. And Trump knows how to use that anger. Just like so many foolish people have done in the past, folks are still falling for it. They're falling for somebody who says, I don't like the way things are and I'm going to fix it. But not a solution. And nobody wants to hear the solution because the solution requires time. Time to educate our youth. Time to grow up as a society. People don't want to wait a couple generations for things to change. They want change now. But it's never worked that way. I have a positive outlook. I believe that we're growing up as a species. I believe that we're moving out of the nonsense era. And we're starting to find out what's really important to us. But in that time, we're going to meet a lot of folks who just don't give a shit. And a lot of humans don't give a shit. And it should not take away our faith in humanity, and it shouldn't take away our faith in ourselves and our ability to change as a species. In other words, don't throw in the towel just because things look bad. Change your perspective. It's all mental transmutation. I can see the negativity. I can see how it comes across. But you cannot let it control you. Because if you want to talk about mind control, the ultimate control is through fear. And if you're afraid of what's there, or you're afraid of what's coming, or you're afraid of what might happen to you, or what someone might do to you, you've already lost the battle. I'd rather die speaking the truth than live lying to myself. I guess that would be what Socrates did in a way. He drank the hemlock. A lot of people don't know this, but he chose to drink hemlock and die over paying a small fine. He was not forced or executed. He was given the option to pay a fine for disturbing the youth and the peace, or to drink the hemlock and die, and he chose to die. To show a principle that the value of what's right is more important than an individual. And we know this inherently as a species. Unfortunately, that knowledge is manipulated by governments to get us to go off and fight and kill people in other distant lands because we believe they're a threat to our country. And it worked for a long time. It wasn't until the psychedelic revolution, and a lot of people went to Vietnam and took acid, took mushrooms. There's a lot of LSD around back then, and people would come back and say, what am I fighting for? Why are we here killing other people? They are me, I am them. And it wasn't just the psychedelics, it was a revolution in thinking, which started in the 60s, but never ended. It's been pushed to the back. And those people have been considered extreme hippies. Every time you see a clip from the 60s talking about LSD, it was just people wildly dancing in the streets, spinning around naked, hanging on poles, listening to the Grateful Dead. But you don't see the hundreds, the thousands, the tens of thousands that were marching for peace, that were writing letters, that were making a difference. Because how dare we show anybody who actually has intelligence trying to make a difference in a society. And a lot of people will give you the attitude of, if you don't like how this country is, then get out. And to that, I just roll my eyes. I don't know what to say to a person who say, if you didn't like what was going on in your family, well, you could abandon your family too. And a lot of people do. Or you can try to make it work and fix things. And I'll be damned if I would leave my country merely because I don't like how the political system works. I love where I live. I love the United States. And I love the people. And it's unfortunate that the rest of the world has this image of America as a bunch of buffoons or arrogant losers that don't get it. Well, we do get it, as much as any other country, because we're all under the propaganda curtain. I don't care how perfect you think your government is, there are people taking advantage. There are people with big pockets. That's how the world works. What to do about that issue, I'm not sure. But the only solution I can see is to show people why money doesn't buy happiness and why power and control are just illusions. That ultimately, the drive to have control over others is just the drive to have control over ourselves. And when we don't feel like we're confident in ourselves, in our lives, and we're not happy, we try to push that off on others. So, I guess that's it. Realize that there's a lot of shit out there that's nonsense, a lot of propaganda going on, but there's also a lot of truth. You can't believe that every single news clip or every single speaker is a shill or a liar. Although it is a lot easier to kind of go into that little shell and believe that you have all the answers or that your group has all the answers. We've all done it. But we quickly find out in today's world that our illusions can be dispelled rather quickly or with a little bit of actual evidence. So, I wish you all well on your journeys. Realize that we're all part of this same structure. We're all going for the same thing, yet some of us aren't. Some of us really are trying to control and dominate. And as positively as I want to put a spin on that, I guess the best positive spin I can say is, at least by seeing those who want control, we see how fruitless it really is, and how unhappy those people actually seem. And it's just like by seeing someone do something, you learn what not to do. Learning by others' mistakes. Hopefully we learn as a whole. Stop buying into this crap. So, I'll just hope for the best. Have a good day, everybody.